There are moments in life that you can never prepare for. No warning signs, no slow build-up. Just an instant where everything changes, where the world you thought you understood tilts on its axis, leaving you breathless, unsteady. That night, I thought I was just being kind. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't realize I was stepping into something I wasn't ready for. It started with a phone call. The house was dark, the silence thick. I had been getting ready for bed, the exhaustion of the day pressing heavy on my shoulders. But then my phone buzzed. I frowned, glancing at the screen. It was him, my stepson. I hesitated. It was late, too late for casual conversation. And lately, things between us had been different. Subtle, unspoken shifts that I had tried to ignore. The way his eyes lingered a second too long. The way his voice softened when he spoke to me. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing. But now, as I stared at his name glowing on my screen, a strange unease curled in my stomach. I answered, "Hello? Can I come over?" His voice was quiet, tense. I straightened, my brows pulling together. "What's wrong?" A pause, a breath. Then, I need to talk to you." The hesitation in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. I shouldn't have said yes. I should have told him it was late, that we could talk tomorrow. But something in his tone, something raw, something almost desperate, made it impossible to turn him away. So I said the words that would change everything. "Come over." 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there he was, standing on my porch, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. He stepped inside without a word. The warmth of the house wrapped around him, but he still looked cold, his jaw tight, his movements stiff. I closed the door behind him, my pulse picking up. "Tell me what's wrong." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned, studying me in a way that made my breath hitch. I didn't know where else to go. A simple sentence. But the weight of it settled deep in my chest. I nodded slowly, stepping closer. "You can always come to me." Something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable. Then, before I could react, he reached up, running a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I need to tell you something, but I don't know how." The air between us shifted, grew heavier. My stomach tightened. "You can tell me anything." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "No, I really can't." His voice was strained, filled with something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Try me." He hesitated. Then, finally, he met my gaze. And when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I think about you. More than I should." The words slammed into me, stealing the air from my lungs. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I had been right. Something had changed. And now, there was no going back. The weight of his words lingered in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "I think about you. More than I should." A single sentence, and yet it shattered the fragile normalcy we had built, breaking apart everything I thought I knew about us. I felt the breath catch in my throat, my pulse hammering so loudly in my ears that for a moment, I could barely process what had just happened. I should have responded. I should have stopped this before it went any further. But my body wouldn't move, my voice refused to work. I was trapped in that moment, staring at him, searching for some sign that this was a mistake, that he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But there was no hesitation in his gaze. No regret. "You don't mean that," I finally managed, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. "I do." His response was immediate, certain. That terrified me more than anything. I took a slow, measured step back, needing to create space, needing to clear the air. This isn't right. You're just confused. You're going through something, and I'm not confused." His voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath it, something raw, something unshakable. I shook my head, gripping the edge of the counter behind me as if it could somehow steady me. "We can't, this conversation, whatever this is, it has to stop." "Then tell me to leave." The challenge in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because I knew, If I told him to go, he would. He would walk away and maybe, just maybe, we could pretend this never happened. But why was it so hard to say it? He stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking, the space I had so desperately tried to create slipping through my fingers. I could feel the warmth of his presence, the quiet intensity radiating from him. Tell me you've never thought about it too. My breath caught. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to look away. It doesn't matter. It does to me. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. It sent another wave of unease through me, twisting something deep in my stomach. I turned away, squeezing my eyes shut, willing myself to regain control. I think you should go. A long, heavy silence followed. Then, if that's what you really want. He didn't sound convinced. I kept my back to him, listening as he let out a slow breath. And then, finally, I heard the sound of his footsteps retreating. The door creaked open. Good night. The door clicked shut. And just like that, he was gone. But the moment didn't leave with him. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my body tense, my thoughts tangled. I replayed it all, over and over. The way he looked at me, the way his voice had sounded, the words that refused to fade from my mind. Tell me you've never thought about it too. I hated how much those words haunted me. Hated that a part of me couldn't forget them. I had convinced myself that morning would fix everything. That daylight would erase the tension, that the lines we had blurred could be drawn back where they belonged. That we could pretend none of it had ever happened. But I was wrong. Because when I stepped into the kitchen the next morning, he was already there. Sitting at the table, coffee in hand, looking calm, looking normal, looking like nothing had changed. But it had. I hesitated in the doorway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He glanced up, meeting my gaze. Morning. A single word, spoken so casually as if last night hadn't happened at all. As if it was just another morning. I forced a small, tense smile. Morning. I moved toward the counter, pouring myself coffee, focusing on anything but the weight of his stare. Neither of us spoke. The silence was unbearable. And then, finally, are we going to talk about it? I gripped the coffee mug tighter, keeping my back to him. No. A pause. Then, you're still thinking about it. I swallowed hard, staring at the dark liquid in my cup. It doesn't matter. It does to me. His words from last night echoed in my mind, making my chest tighten. I turned, finally meeting his gaze. You need to stop. I can't. His voice was quieter now, but no less certain. I shook my head, gripping the counter behind me for support. We don't have a choice. I think we do. He stood slowly, watching me, waiting. For what, I wasn't sure. For me to break? For me to run? For me to tell him what he wanted to hear? I did none of those things. Instead, I took a deep breath, setting my coffee down with a quiet clink against the counter. This ends now. Silence. Then, if that's what you want. It wasn't a challenge this time. It was something else. Something unreadable. I turned, walking away before I could second-guess myself. Before I could make a mistake I could never take back. I made it to the hallway before I stopped, pressing my hands against the wall, exhaling shakily. I had done the right thing. I knew I had. But then why did it feel like something between us had only just begun?